the world's greatest roller coasters can instantly become history's worst nightmares. Hi, I'm Nathan, and these 5 roller coaster disasters will make you question if that next ride is worth the risk. From riders trapped upside down during a citywide blackout, to a ride whose track suddenly shifted beneath a moving train, ending in one of the deadliest disasters of its era. It was August 18, 2021, during a special late-night event at a large amusement park in San Antonio, Texas. Even near midnight, the air was still hot from a record-setting heat wave. The park was crowded, and one roller coaster remained the most popular attraction. It was known for a slow, upside-down section more than 100 feet above the midway. Guests everywhere were filming rides and sharing videos online. Julianne Varner was 34 years old and worked as a freelance videographer and travel content producer. That night, she was part of a 3-person media crew creating a feature about late-night amusement parks. After spending hours filming attractions and interviewing guests, the team decided to take one final ride to capture onboard footage before ending the night. The crew included a 29-year-old camera operator and a 41-year-old field producer. They sat together to make filming easier. Several guests recognized them and began recording as the train prepared to leave. Employees had also been discussing occasional power fluctuations caused by the extreme heat. It's understandable why Julie wanted one last ride. If I thought I only needed one final shot to finish a project, I probably would have done the same thing. The train left the station normally and completed several sections of the course without issue. Then, as it entered the slow upside-down section high above the ground, everything suddenly went dark. A massive regional blackout had struck the city. The coaster's backup systems activated immediately. The train came to a controlled stop, leaving riders hanging upside down. Guests below quickly began recording the unusual sight. Operators contacted riders and explained that evacuation procedures were being prepared. At first, the situation seemed more frustrating than dangerous. Rescue crews brought lighting and evacuation equipment while maintenance workers inspected the train. Some riders even joked with workers on the track. As the wait continued, some riders reported dizziness and discomfort from remaining upside down. During inspections, engineers noticed one car appeared to be shifting slightly. The movement was small, but repeated measurements confirmed it. The train remained secured to the track, and the movement appeared minor. Rescue personnel decided it was safer to continue evacuating riders than leave them suspended indefinitely. Everyone thought they were dealing with a delay, not a disaster. Several riders were removed from other sections of the train. Julie and her co-workers remained seated together in the affected car. Investigators later determined that a damaged mechanical component inside the car had been under unusual stress while the train remained suspended. During the evacuation, the component suddenly failed. Witnesses reported hearing a loud, metallic sound. One side of the car suddenly dropped and twisted against the evacuation platform beside the train. Investigators later determined that the failed component allowed the car to shift farther than initially believed. The movement forced part of the car against sections of the evacuation structure, creating a violent jolt that traveled through multiple rows. Riders were slammed into restraints, seat frames, and nearby steel framework before the car finally came to rest. Julie suffered devastating chest injuries. The camera operator suffered fatal head trauma, while the field producer sustained severe crushing injuries. 5 nearby riders suffered broken bones and other serious injuries. Rescue crews halted the evacuation and stabilized the damaged section before removing the remaining riders. Julianne Varner and her 2 co-workers later died from injuries suffered during the train shift. 5 additional riders were hospitalized. Investigators concluded that the blackout did not directly cause the deaths. The power failure stopped the train, but the fatalities occurred later when a damaged component failed during the evacuation, causing the affected car to shift unexpectedly. Following the investigation, the coaster remained closed while the damaged components were replaced and evacuation procedures were reviewed. No criminal charges were filed because investigators found no evidence that park employees or ride operators knew about the hidden defect before the accident. Julie made it through the ride itself and was only moments from safety when everything changed. The next story begins on a coaster where the danger was still moving. It was August 14, 2017, in Sandusky, Ohio. A towering steel roller coaster dominated the skyline of one of the busiest amusement parks in the country. Known for its speed and intense turns, the ride attracted thousands of guests every day during the summer season. The victim was Gideon Smith, a 27-year-old warehouse supervisor. Friends described him as dependable, easygoing, and usually the person organizing weekend trips and group activities. That day, he had joined several co-workers for a summer outing at the park. Earlier in the afternoon, employees reported an unusual vibration during one of the coaster's cycles. Maintenance crews briefly inspected the ride, ran several test runs, and found no issue serious enough to keep it closed. Operations resumed, and most guests never thought about the delay again. As evening approached, Gideon's group decided to ride the coaster one last time before leaving. The line had become shorter, and Gideon ended up seated near the rear of a nearly full train. I can understand why Gideon wanted one more ride. After spending all day at an amusement park, that final ride often feels like the perfect way to end the experience. The train left the station and completed most of the course without any obvious problems. Riders screamed, laughed, and enjoyed themselves while spectators below watched another routine cycle of a coaster that had operated countless times before. What nobody realized was that a critical wheel assembly beneath one of the rear cars had been weakening over time. Hidden fatigue cracks had developed inside a metal component that absorbed enormous forces during every ride cycle. The damage wasn't visible to riders, and there were no obvious signs of danger. As Gideon's train entered one of its final elevated turns at highway speeds, several riders felt a sudden jolt. A loud, metallic bang echoed across the midway below, drawing the attention of nearby guests. At that moment, the weakened wheel assembly finally failed. The rear car derailed first. For a fraction of a second, the train continued forward. Then the derailment spread through neighboring cars as the train's momentum dragged them sideways into the turn. Witnesses later described hearing grinding metal and seeing sparks erupt beneath the train as components scraped against the track. Thousands of guests watched in disbelief as multiple cars twisted at unnatural angles. At first, some thought it was part of the attraction. That confusion disappeared when debris began falling from the train. Small pieces of metal and fiberglass scattered below, and people immediately started moving away as employees shouted for guests to clear the area. The entire derailment unfolded in only a few seconds. Gideon was seated close to where the failure began. As the train tore itself apart, riders were violently thrown against restraints and surrounding structures. Several cars suffered severe damage before the wreckage finally came to a stop, leaving some passengers stranded high above the ground. I honestly can't imagine what that must have felt like. One second you're enjoying the final moments of a roller coaster, and the next you're trapped inside a wrecked train trying to understand what just happened. Emergency procedures were activated immediately. Firefighters, paramedics, and rescue personnel rushed to the scene while portions of the park were evacuated. Because several cars were suspended above the ground, rescuers needed specialized equipment to safely reach trapped riders. Sadly, Gideon had suffered catastrophic blunt force injuries during the derailment. Despite rescue efforts, he was pronounced dead shortly after responders reached him. The coaster was closed indefinitely while investigators examined the wreckage, maintenance records, and damaged components. Their investigation determined that a fatigue crack within a critical wheel assembly had progressed over time before finally failing during normal operation. Once the component broke, the rear portion of the train left the track and triggered the derailment. Based on physical evidence and engineering analysis, investigators concluded that Gideon Smith died from catastrophic blunt force trauma sustained during the roller coaster derailment. What happened to Gideon unfolded in an instant, but it started with problems no rider could possibly see. Daniel's story follows another coaster where a hidden failure stays unnoticed until it's far too late. It was March 4th, 2015, in Arlington, Texas. The amusement park was packed with families enjoying spring vacation. One of the park's largest roller coasters dominated the skyline, its trains roaring overhead every few minutes as guests gathered below to watch. Few people in line that afternoon had any reason to believe they were about to witness one of the worst roller coaster disasters in modern amusement park history. Among the riders was Daniel Tate, a 42-year-old construction estimator. Friends and family described him as hardworking, dependable, and someone who never lost his enthusiasm for roller coasters. Whenever he visited a park, he always wanted to ride the biggest attraction available. During this vacation, the coaster had been at the top of his list all day. The train involved had completed numerous successful cycles earlier that afternoon. Operators reported nothing unusual during routine checks. Eventually, Daniel and dozens of other guests boarded the train. Excitement filled the station as restraints were checked and the ride departed. I can understand why Daniel was excited. Roller coasters are designed to feel dangerous while actually being safe. Most people climb into their seats expecting a few minutes of adrenaline, not realizing they are about to become part of a tragedy remembered for years. The train climbed its first lift hill and began navigating the course. For most of the ride, everything appeared normal. Then, as it entered one of the fastest sections of track, disaster struck. Investigators later determined that a critical wheel assembly component fractured under extreme load. The failure allowed part of the assembly to separate from the car. Almost immediately, one side of the car rose above the rail. Instead of remaining securely guided along the track, the car began to derail while still attached to the rest of the train. Witnesses reported hearing several loud metallic impacts. The damaged car slammed repeatedly into the track structure as the train continued forward at high speed. The resulting forces spread through the connected cars behind it, causing several cars to partially leave their intended alignment and collide with portions of the ride structure. What followed lasted only seconds. Investigators later determined that multiple cars experienced varying degrees of derailment while remaining connected to the train. Riders were thrown violently against restraints and surrounding structures. Some cars overturned while others collided with sections of track and support framework before the train finally came to a stop. The scene that followed was chaotic. Emergency calls flooded dispatch centers as park employees rushed toward the wreckage. First responders arrived to find damaged coaster cars and dozens of injured passengers awaiting rescue. Daniel was located in one of the most heavily damaged sections of the train. Despite immediate rescue efforts, he had suffered unsurvivable blunt force injuries. 3 other riders were also pronounced dead at the scene, while many more suffered severe trauma, fractures, and spinal injuries. Dozens required medical treatment, making it one of the deadliest roller coaster accidents of its era. I think what makes incidents like this so disturbing is how ordinary the day begins. Families buy tickets, stand in line, take photos, and plan where they'll eat afterward. Then, a failure lasting only seconds changes countless lives forever. The investigation lasted months. Engineers concluded that the accident began with the catastrophic failure of a wheel assembly component during a high-speed turn. Once the affected car lost proper contact with the rail, derailment forces spread through the train, causing multiple cars to leave the track and collide with ride structures. Daniel Tate and 3 other passengers died from catastrophic blunt force trauma sustained during the derailment, while dozens of survivors faced lengthy recoveries from severe injuries. The coaster remained closed indefinitely as investigators reviewed maintenance procedures, inspection practices, and component design. Up next is a woman who thought fear was the biggest danger waiting for her that day. Before we get to the next case, consider subscribing, because somehow the stories only get worse from here. It was May 19, 2018, in Charlotte, North Carolina. A large amusement park was hosting a special event for invited guests, local officials, and media crews. One of the main attractions was the park's tallest steel roller coaster, known for its steep drops and powerful airtime hills. Among the guests was Alora Frey, a 24-year-old fitness instructor. Friends described her as energetic and determined. Roller coasters, however, had never been her favorite. She loved amusement parks, but usually avoided the biggest rides. That day, she decided things would be different. She spent the morning gradually working her way through increasingly intense attractions. Each successful ride chipped away at her fear. By afternoon, only the park's largest coaster remained. Her friends noticed she looked nervous while waiting in line, but she was smiling. To Alora, this ride represented something bigger than a few minutes of adrenaline. It was proof that she could finally overcome a fear she had carried for years. I can understand that feeling. Sometimes the hardest part of facing a challenge is convincing yourself to take the first step. When boarding began, attendants directed riders into their seats and performed routine restraint checks. Alora sat near the middle of the train. The coaster used modern lap bar restraints designed to allow controlled rider movement during airtime while preventing ejection. Employees completed pull checks and received normal status readings from the control system. Nothing appeared unusual. Investigators would later determine that a recently replaced component inside Alora's restraint contained a manufacturing defect. The lap bar lowered normally and felt secure during boarding, giving neither Alora nor ride attendants any reason to suspect a problem. However, an internal locking pal had engaged only partially rather than reaching its intended locking position. The ride's monitoring system detected the position of the restraint but could not verify whether the internal lock had fully engaged. With no visible warning signs, the train left the station. The coaster climbed its lift hill and plunged down its first drop. The restraint initially remained in place as the train accelerated through the opening elements. According to investigators, the partially engaged locking pal was able to withstand the forces of the first drop. However, repeated airtime forces placed additional stress on the compromised mechanism. By the time the train reached one of its largest hills, the defective component had begun slipping under load. As riders experienced a moment of weightlessness, the restraint suddenly moved beyond its intended range. Nearby riders immediately noticed something was wrong. Witnesses later reported seeing Alora rise unexpectedly from her seat. Several riders instinctively reacted, but the event unfolded in seconds. Alora was ejected from the train. She struck structural supports beneath the track before falling into a restricted maintenance area. Guests across the park witnessed portions of the incident, while security cameras and spectator videos captured evidence that later became crucial to the investigation. Ride operators activated emergency procedures and stopped the attraction. First responders arrived within minutes, but the injuries were unsurvivable. Alora was pronounced dead at the scene from catastrophic blunt force trauma. The part that stays with me is that she did everything she was supposed to do. She followed instructions, sat properly in her seat, and trusted safety systems that had worked countless times before. Engineers traced the failed component to a manufacturing batch distributed to several attractions produced by the same manufacturer. Regulators ordered inspections while operators temporarily closed affected rides for testing. Investigators concluded that Alora's accident resulted from a defective restraint component combined with a monitoring system that could not detect incomplete internal lock engagement. Following the findings, the park permanently removed the affected restraint assemblies, implemented additional inspection requirements, and kept the coaster closed until the safety modifications were completed. No criminal charges were filed because investigators found no evidence that park employees or ride operators knew about the hidden defect before the accident. Alora spent the entire day building confidence for that one ride. The final story centers on someone who wasn't even there for the coaster itself. It was July 26, 2014, in a small town in Pennsylvania. The weather was warm, and the local amusement park was busy with families enjoying their summer weekend. One of the park's oldest roller coasters was also its most popular attraction. People had been riding it for years, and many visitors considered it a tradition whenever they came to the park. Among the guests that day was Olivia Carter, a 33-year-old accountant. Friends described her as cheerful, organized, and someone who always enjoyed spending time with family. She had come to the park with her husband and younger brother for a simple weekend outing. Before leaving, the group agreed to ride the park's famous roller coaster one last time because it had always been Olivia's favorite attraction. I can understand why Olivia wanted one final ride. Whenever people visit a place they love, it's natural to want one last memorable experience before heading home. The coaster had been operating throughout the day without any reported problems. Riders boarded, restraints were checked, and the train left the station as it had countless times before. Olivia sat near the middle of the train with her family nearby. Nothing about the ride seemed unusual. The train climbed the first hill and began moving through the course. Riders laughed and raised their hands as the coaster sped through turns and small drops. People below watched from walkways and nearby benches while waiting for their own turn to ride. As the train entered a large, curved section of track, several guests nearby reported hearing a loud, cracking sound. At first, most people ignored it. Roller coasters coasters often make noise, and nobody immediately realized something was wrong. But within moments, another loud crack followed. Investigators later determined that a heavily worn section inside one of the ride's support connections gave way under the repeated stress of daily operation. The failed connection was located at a critical load-bearing point where multiple structural members met. Once it failed, part of the surrounding support assembly could no longer properly distribute the coaster's weight, causing a section of track to shift unexpectedly. Riders suddenly felt a violent jolt. The track beneath part of the train suddenly sagged and shifted downward, disrupting the train's normal path through the curve. Cars slammed into nearby steel supports as the coaster lost its normal path. Pieces of metal and debris fell toward the ground below, while frightened guests ran from the area. The train did not fall completely from the structure, but the damage was severe. Several cars twisted and struck parts of the coaster frame before finally coming to a stop. When I think about this part of the story, it really stands out to me because nobody on that train made a mistake. They simply trusted a ride that had been standing there for years. Emergency crews arrived quickly. Park employees cleared the area and began helping trapped passengers. Because parts of the structure remained unstable, rescuers had to move carefully while reaching the injured riders. Olivia was located in one of the most heavily damaged sections of the train. Witnesses reported that the impact forces inside her car were especially severe when the structure shifted. Despite rescue efforts, she suffered catastrophic injuries and was pronounced dead at the scene. Several other riders survived but suffered broken bones, head injuries, and other serious trauma. Many required lengthy hospital treatment and rehabilitation. The coaster remained closed while investigators examined the wreckage. Engineers reviewed maintenance records, inspected damaged parts, and studied years of inspection reports. Their findings showed that moisture had slowly caused hidden damage inside a critical support connection. While surface inspections had found signs of wear, the true condition of the internal structure was much worse than anyone realized. Investigators concluded that Olivia Carter died from traumatic injuries sustained when a major support connection failed during operation, causing a partial structural collapse of the roller coaster. The accident was ruled the result of long-term structural deterioration that went undetected until the day of the disaster. The findings led to stricter inspections of aging roller coasters and renewed attention on hidden structural wear. For Olivia's family, however, the investigation could never change the reason they had come to the park that day. She was there to enjoy one last ride with the people she loved, and evidence later showed that a hidden weakness inside the coaster's structure ultimately caused the tragedy.